Some of the darkest moments in history are only remembered through the written word, but with the invention of cameras, moments can now be captured in time for future generations to see with their very own eyes. And sometimes these moments are not for the faint of heart. We're going to start off the list with this image here. This is not one of those niche taxidermy pieces. This is indeed a living two-headed dog, pieced together by a mad scientist. Vladimir Demikov was a scientist from the Soviet Union who did some really questionable stuff back in the 50s. He came up with this strange idea of attaching the head of one dog onto another, creating a two-headed dog. Now, why? Well, he wanted to figure out more about organ transplants and see how the body would react to these surgeries. From a pure scientific perspective, what he did was kind of a big deal. It was about pushing the limits of what doctors could do back then. But is it incredibly creepy and unethical? Absolutely. This sparked a huge ethical debate. Seemed like some bizarre freak show rather than an ethical scientific pursuit, and people got pretty upset about it. Playing around with life like that, creating these weird creatures just for the sake of curiosity, it didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and unsurprisingly, the dogs didn't live very long after these experiments. So while Demikov's work was kind of groundbreaking, it was also just downright cruel. You know what's downright cruel to us is if you don't subscribe to this channel. I mean, what are you waiting for? It's free. We got awesome videos coming your way on the daily, so don't miss out. Hit that button down below. Next up, we have this image here of Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of explorers after finally reaching the South Pole. It had been a long, grueling, treacherous expedition, and they'd arrived only to find out that a Norwegian team of explorers had beaten them to the punch. Not only were these men now exhausted, starving, and frostbitten, but they wouldn't even be remembered as the team to reach the South Pole first. And now they had to make the long return trip back to base camp. You can see how miserable and distraught they all look here, not to mention very unwell. Definitely frostbitten. Tragically, the team would never make it home alive. The weather was harsh, they were already suffering from exhaustion, and they were running out of supplies. The first member of the team to pass was Edgar Evans, who died on February 17th of 1912. Then Lawrence Oates willingly walked out into a blizzard, ending his own life. Scott, along with Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, and Edgar Evans, kept going, but things got worse. A storm ended up trapping them in their tent for 9 whole days, and they couldn't move. They died in the tent, just 11 miles away from where they could get more supplies. This is a photograph taken in 1986 of what were known as the Chernobyl liquidators. See those white stripes, the patterns at the bottom of this photo? That was caused by radiation on the film. The Chernobyl liquidators were a group of people who were called in to clean up the mess after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Their job was to try and make things safer for dealing with the radioactive contamination. These were regular folks, soldiers, firefighters, and other workers who faced really dangerous conditions to help control the aftermath. These workers had to deal with high levels of radiation, and many of them got sick later on due to exposure. They didn't have fancy gear like we might see today. In fact, there wasn't even enough protective equipment for everyone, so some of them had to construct their own out of leather and lead plates. It was an incredibly tough and risky job, and they faced severe health consequences because of it. Some, of course, even died because of the exposure. Alright, this is a pretty famous photograph in the world of paranormal photography, and for good reason. This picture has a pretty chilling tale behind it. It's a very classic kind of ghost story. Back in 1924, during a routine voyage, tragedy struck the SS Watertown when 2 crew members, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, lost their lives and were buried at sea. 2 men had been sent to the ship's interior cofferdam to clean and do repairs, but they were unaware there was poisonous gas leaking into the area they were working in, and they died inhaling the fumes. What followed was this series of events that would go down in maritime history as one of the eeriest tales ever told by seafarers. After the burial, the remaining crew reported an unsettling sight. They claimed to see ghostly faces appearing in the water alongside the ship, and the faces looked just like Courtney and Meehan. One crew member managed to snap the famous photo that is now infamous, seemingly revealing their ghostly faces in the water. Alright, want to see part of the underground hideout of a Russian doomsday cult? Well, you're looking at it. This is one of those images you can kind of smell just by looking at. Never a good thing. Pyotr Kuznetsov led a strange group called the True Russian Orthodox Church. And in 2007, he convinced his followers to barricade themselves inside a cave. Kuznetsov wasn't with them because police had him in custody. He claimed to be a prophet, combining Christian teachings with visions of the world ending. So why did they hide in a cave? Well, they genuinely thought the world was about to end, and by shutting themselves away, they believed they could shield themselves from the apocalypse. The police found out where the cave was, but the people inside threatened to harm themselves if the police tried to step in, and after a few months, yes, months, spent in that cave, the Russian security forces finally stepped in. 2 members had actually already died in the cave and were creating dangerous fumes for the folks that were still alive. Awful. Eventually, though, they were hauled out of there.
Roberta Louise Gibb, better known as Bobby Gibb, seen here without a number after completing the Boston Marathon, was the first ever woman to run the entirety of the Boston Marathon in 1966. Prior to Bobby's participation in the event, the longest amateur athletic union sanctioned race for women was only 1.5 miles, and even after Bobby's unofficial run, the Boston Marathon didn't open up a women's division for the race until 1972, 6 years after Bobby became the pre-sanctioned era women's winner in 1966. Prior to becoming the first woman to participate in the race, albeit unofficially, Bobby trained for 2 years, covering as much as 40 miles per day. Prior to the race, she had actually requested to join as an official participant, but her request was denied due to the fact that, according to the race director, Will Cloney, women were not physiologically capable of running marathon distances. On the day of the race, Bobby donned her brother's Bermuda shorts and a large hoodie and waited until about half the runners were on their way before joining in. Partway through the race, moved by the support of her fellow runners, she removed her hoodie and revealed herself as a woman. When she reached the end of the race, 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds after her start time, the governor of Massachusetts, John Vlope, was waiting to shake her hand.
Pictured here is a woman named Ina Squire Brown. She was a professional dancer and, as you can clearly see, soon to be married. Her fiance was Royal Air Force Officer J.C. Martin. What's incredible about this image is when and where it was taken. November 5th, 1940 in London. The photo was colorized a couple years back. All that rubble you see on the lawn, that was part of her home, which had just recently been bombed. And the craziest part was that the bombing had been going on for months and would continue on for months. On September 7th of 1940, the Germans began dropping bombs on English towns and cities in what was referred to as a blitzkrieg, which translates to lightning war. And for 57 consecutive nights, the bombs continued to fall. London was hit the hardest, but this was happening all over the country. So this photo was taken in the midst of all that. An image that perfectly captures the strength and perseverance of the greatest generation. Despite the chaos, the uncertainty, their home crumbling around them, and by that I mean their city and by extension the entire country, Ina Squire Brown, pictured here with her father and neighbor, had smiles on their faces and were going on about their lives. They kept calm and carried on.
In 1921, Elizabeth L. Gardner, pictured here in the pilot seat of a Martin B-26 Marauder, became one of the first American female pilots to serve in a world war. She had been trained by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets, who later went on to command the B-29 aircraft that dropped the first atom bomb on Hiroshima. During her time as an active member of the Air Force, Gardner flew many medium-sized bomber planes, as well as aircrafts that towed aerial targets. In 1939, the WASP organization was formed, WASP being an abbreviation for Women Air Force Service Pilots, after a woman named Jackie Cochran wrote to the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, suggesting the idea of using female pilots in non-combat missions. Gardner joined the organization, which eventually disbanded in 1944. In 2009, after Gardner's many years of service, she and the remaining living members of the WASP organization were recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal for their service, one of the oldest and highest civilian awards given out in in the United States.
This photograph was also snapped in the midst of the London Blitz of 1940, a milkman walking through mounds of rubble to carry out his deliveries. War or not, people still needed their milk. This one was taken by a photographer named Fred Morley on October 9th, just a month after the attacks began. Now, although this photo was genuinely taken at the time, right after a bombing the previous night, it is somewhat staged. See, the Ministry of War wanted to keep everyone's morale high, which was not an easy task given that the Germans were destroying people's homes on a nightly basis, so photographs of the destruction were often censored or just kept out of newspapers altogether. Photographer Fred Morley was frustrated by this. Not only did he feel the need to document what was going on, but he felt that people deserved to see what was truly happening as well. So he compromised. Morley grabbed his assistant, dressed him up as a milkman, and had some firemen who were working on bridges nearby pose in the background, and then snapped this now iconic photo. It showed the destruction left in the wake of the previous night's attack, while also sending an uplifting message to the people of England that they weren't going to let the war break them.
If you are currently using a friction heater, aka a radiator, or if you ever have, Charles S.L. Baker, pictured here demonstrating his radiator system in 1906 next to his unnamed assistant, is the man whom you should send your thank you notes. Born into slavery on August 3rd of 1859, at the age of 15, Baker began working as an assistant to his father, who was an express agent at the time. It was then that Baker developed his interest in the mechanical sciences. He spent decades perfecting his invention, experimenting with different forms of friction using bricks and various types of metal, and after 23 years, he did it. Charles S.L. Baker invented the first ever friction heating device known to man in the form of two metal cylinders stacked one inside of the other with a spinning wooden core in the center to produce the friction, and subsequently heat. After his success, Baker went on to start a manufacturing business for his heating device, the Friction Heat and Boiler Company, which was established in 1904. His company raised $136,000 in capital, equal to almost $5 million today. Baker went on to marry, and his wife eventually gave birth to a daughter named Lulu Bell Baker. When Charles died on May 5th of 1926, he had revolutionized the scientific industry and had changed the way people view the possibilities of simple friction forever.
Coming in at number 10 is Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best known books. Now, this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9, an inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem witch trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem witch trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked. Number 7. Pyramids on the Moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about. While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that captured the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. People, most of whom were civilians. When the bomb detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. And heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic cataract looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well.
The first image is a screen grab from a video filmed by a US Marine officer on the 20th of April in 2021 on a military base in 29 Palms, California. After the release of the photograph, multiple Marines came forward to confirm the existence of an aircraft, saying that while the photo showcases only the triangle-shaped formation of bright lights, in person the men were able to make out the black body of the aircraft as well. The unidentified flying object is said to have hovered for 10 minutes in the air before it suddenly vanished without any trace. The men were able to rule out flares for being the cause of the mysterious lights, but were never able to figure out exactly what they saw that night. However, it appears the footage has not been taken lightly, as the Pentagon has started an investigation into just what exactly was seen on the night of April 20th of 2021 in the skies above the 29 Palms military base. Next up, we have a series of photographs taken by cosmonaut Ivan Vanger in August of 2020 whilst aboard the International Space Station that appears to depict 5 unidentified flying objects flying at the same speed while maintaining the same distance between each other as well as their surroundings, moving in a straight line just above the Earth's curved horizon visible in the night sky. Vangar, both surprised and curious, took to Twitter, now named X, to share the footage in hopes of getting some clarity as to exactly what he was looking at. In an exciting unfolding of events, his tweet was picked up by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, and and a spokesperson revealed that experts were in fact studying the video in an attempt to determine what exactly Vanguard had managed to capture. Did you guys know that Japan was a major hotbed for UFO activity? Because I didn't. But apparently the Pentagon does? In fact, UFO sightings are so common in Japan that its military has reportedly ordered all pilots to disclose any and all identified flying objects directly to the Japanese government. Not only that, but Japanese self-defense forces have also undergone extensive training in relation to UFO sighting protocol. To date, 6 alleged encounters between pilots and UFOs have been reported to the Japanese government, one of which was recorded, and depicts 10 white circular balls flying through the skies of Osaka in Japan. While the government has yet to publicly comment on any of the incidents, the update of self-defense protocol alone is pretty telling. The next image was shared by a pretty reputable source, National Geographic. The image was captured by Sergio Loaiza on September 4th of 1971 during an aerial survey of Lake Kote. Everything seemed pretty normal until the photos were taken back to Loaiza's development lab, where he noticed something very strange. A metallic flying aircraft, estimated to have a diameter of 160 feet, was located in the corner of one of the photographs. When he presented the photos to his superiors at the National Geographic Institute, they shut him down quick, forbidding Sergio as well as his colleagues from sharing any information of what they had seen that day. In 1979, however, the photograph was leaked, and the object that appeared in the image was officially classified as an unidentified flying object. In 2021, the existence of the object was again confirmed after the original copy of the photograph was scanned, and it was revealed that the UFO's presence was more than just a scratch on the lens or a piece of dust in the wind. So what do you think it was? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have footage that comes to us straight from the declassifieds. Remember how I told you at the beginning of the video that the government quite literally copped to the fact that they have been hiding the existence of UFOs for years? Well, they did, and they came with receipts. On the 15th of January in 2023, while surveilling an MQ-9 Reaper aircraft, an unidentified aerial presence was captured moving at speeds unreachable by any of Earth's modern-day technological advances. Not only this, but as the object whizzed through the field of view of the camera lens, it appeared to leave behind an atmospheric wake before disappearing completely into the sky. Guys, if you have any, please leave your UFO and alien stories in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with any of these kind of things. Next up, we have arguably the most beautiful alien assuming photograph I have ever seen. The photo was taken in 2004 by a retired Royal Air Force officer while on vacation in Sri Lanka. The site was described as some kind of colorful giant donut in the sky with hues of oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. After its capture, the photograph was turned into the Royal Air Force Flying Dales Base in North Yorkshire in England, where it became a classified document held by the Ministry of Defense. The image has since been declassified, of course, and is now available for public viewing, but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the photo as well as the photographer, as his identity, along with any other information regarding the incident, is pretty much non-existent. I mean, come on, it's a giant glowing light in the sky. You're really telling me no one else saw this and that there's no other information out there other than the fact that the photo exists? Oh yeah, and not only that, but it was deemed classified by the British Ministry of Defense, so I'm thinking there's something else going on here. Next up today, we have the location of the Maid of Harlech, a Lockheed P-38F Lightning long-range fighter jet whose whereabouts is strictly prohibited from being documented publicly, by a photograph or otherwise. The jet, which was operated during the Second World War, was an incredibly effective weapons craft, night fighter, and observational aircraft. The plane eventually ended up somewhere along the 4-mile Harlech Beach as a result of none other than human error. You see, the pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert F. Elliott of the US military, had taken off using the aircraft's reserve fuel tanks. Not an uncommon practice, but it seems he had forgotten to switch back to the main reserve as 55 minutes into the flight, the left engine lost power. Thinking there was an issue with the engine, Elliott decided to make his way back to the airfield, but before he could, the right engine died too. Elliott made an emergency landing along the shores of the British beach where luckily no one was injured, and the plane was eventually claimed by the sand. It wasn't until 65 years later in 2007 that the craft was discovered by a civilian. While many locals are aware of the plane's exact location, the distribution of such information is prohibited by the UK government due to its protected status, which was awarded in an attempt attempt to preserve the wreck as well as the wreck site. First on the list we have Siegfried Fischbacher, born in Bavaria, Germany on June 13th, 1939, and Roy Horn, born in Oldenburg, Germany on October 3rd, 1944. However, the pair were more commonly known as simply Siegfried and Roy. If you haven't heard of them, or if you have and you just can't quite place where the name comes from, the dynamic duo are most well known for their time spent headlining the stages of Vegas, presenting their magic act to huge crowds of adoring fans. That is, of course, until the day this photo was taken, on October 3rd of 2003. In an effort to push themselves and their act to the next level, the pair had decided to bring in a third. No, not a third person, but a 400-pound, 7-foot-long Siberian tiger, affectionately referred to as Manticore. Well, actually, Roy had adopted the tiger as a cub, but by the time the incident occurred, it was massive. On the night of October 3rd in 2003, the trio was ready to go and began their performance under the bright lights of the big city. But unfortunately, the performance was cut short, as just minutes after this picture was taken, Manticore began to stray away from his performance, seemingly interested in the person sitting in the front row of the show. Roy placed himself between the giant animal and the crowd, commanding the tiger to turn around and go back to the act, but instead the animal refused. An altercation began, during which the tiger clamped its jaws forcefully around Roy's neck and dragged him 30 feet off stage as the crowd watched in horror. Eventually, they were able to remove the animal, and Roy did later recover from his injuries, but unfortunately the show did not. Roy maintained that the tiger did not attack him, but instead that the performer had suffered a stroke and that the animal's only intention was to bring him to safety. Next, we have the final moments of Carl Williams, depicted in a CCTV screen grab moments before his death. Williams, born October 13th of 1970, was a convicted killer and an illicit substance distributor from Melbourne, Australia. He had one wife, one child, and a brother. In 2007, Carl Williams was convicted of 3 killings as well as the illicit trafficking, and was later sentenced to serve 2 consecutive life sentences for his crimes in Barwon Prison in Victoria, Australia, with a 35-year period in which he would not be eligible for parole. His sentence was, however, cut short, as on April 19th of 2010, as Williams started reading the paper, he met the beginning of his end. It seems a fellow inmate by the name of Matthew Charles Johnson, seen in the photograph approaching from behind, holding the stem of an exercise bike, had discovered that Williams had been snitching to the officers, and he was not happy. With the same exercise bike stem, he beat Williams, who died of his injuries. The last photo of Lady Diana, along with her partner Dottie Fade and driver Henry Paul, is next on the list. The former princess, born July 1st of 1961 in Norfolk, United Kingdom, lived to be just 36 years old before she met her end in a car crash on August 31st, 1997. There have been multiple theories as to what caused the crash that took the lives of Diana, Fade, and Paul, but the 3 most popular are probably that it was 1, an accident caused by paparazzi flash blinding the driver, causing him to crash; 2, that the driver Henry Paul had been struggling with substance abuse and lost control of the vehicle due to being under the influence; and 3, that the crash was a cover-up, constructed by the royal family after the separation of Diana and former prince, now King, Charles. It has been speculated that Lady Diana was survived by a daughter she had previously hidden from the public, but this was never confirmed. Even after her death, many continued to recognize her regality, with a large amount of the British population even affectionately referring to the maiden as the People's Princess. Next, we have Jane Wicker, the Plane Dancer, also known as the Ballerina in the Sky. At the age of 44, Jane was at the top of the game in the extreme sport of wing-walking daredevil entertainment. On the 22nd of June in 2013, the mother of 2, along with her pilot, Charlie Schweckner, made their ascent in a small 50 HP Stearman airplane for what they believed would be nothing more than a routine act. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Things took a dark turn when the aircraft seemingly stalled in the air before plummeting and crashing on the ground, with the pilot at the wheel and Wicker on the wing. Upon impact, the plane burst into flames and the pair were killed instantly. Schwenker, the veteran pilot, had been flying for the Circus Air Show since 1990, 23 years, and Wicker was survived by her 2 sons and fiancé. Up next, at our halfway point, we have the last ever photo taken of R. Bud Dwyer. The American politician, born November 21st of 1939, served as a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate from 1971 to 1981, and as a Pennsylvania treasurer from 1981 to 1987, during which time he was charged with 5 counts of mail fraud, 4 counts of racketeering, and 4 counts of perjury conspiracy to commit bribery. Later, in 1986, the disgraced politician was found guilty and convicted of 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, perjury, racketeering, and accepting bribes. Dwyer's sentencing date was scheduled for January 23rd of the following year, but as you've probably guessed, he never made it to court. On January 22nd of 1987, just one day before Dwyer was scheduled to receive his sentence, he called for a news conference to be held in the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, as well as for said conference to be broadcasted live across the state, which it was. Reporters jumped at the opportunity to have one final chance to question Dwyer before sentencing, but little did they know that this would be the last time anyone would ask Dwyer anything, as halfway through the broadcast, ex-treasurer reached into an envelope and pulled out a weapon and ended his life. The really sad part is that Dwyer had maintained that he was innocent throughout the entirety of his court case, and it was only after his death that it was discovered he'd been framed for the whole thing. Next up, we have a photograph depicting the final moments of two Dutch service technicians. On October 29th of 2013, the two men made their way up to the top of a turbine for some maintenance work, and when they arrived at the top, a fire broke out, blocking the only chance of escape for both Dan Kaus and Aaron Cortus. The two can be seen embracing between the two blades of the giant windmill just moments before they met their separate ends. One of the men decided to leap from the structure and was later found in a field below, and the other found inside the charred remains of the turbine when firefighters were eventually able to make it up to the scene of the fire. The two men were members of an incredibly close-knit village near Amersfoort in Netherlands, and their deaths are said to have caused a profoundly deep sense of mourning within the communities. The Hindenburg is next up on the list. Commonly confused for a blimp, the long airship was actually a conventional Zeppelin design, meaning that the Hindenburg contained an internal framework to maintain its shape, while blimps rely on only internal air pressure. The airship was the pride of 1937 Germany when it was launched on May 6th of that year, carrying 36 passengers and 61 crewmen. However, the joyous moment was short-lived, as not long after its ascent, the airship exploded, most likely due to a gas leak that caused hydrogen from the vessel to mix with the oxygen in the air, and a small spark created by nothing more than static electricity caused the Hindenburg to be engulfed in flames. Surprisingly, the accident only caused 36 fatalities compared to the 92 people on board, and considering the entire aircraft had been engulfed in flames. Of the deceased from the incident were 13 passengers, 22 crewmen aboard the ship, and one ground crew member. Starting off our top three, we have a photograph of Lalisa de Sisa, the first to cross the finish line of the Boston Marathon on April 15th of 2013, winning him the gold medal. Just 2 hours later, explosions went off in the very spot where the photograph had been captured, taking the lives of 3 people and badly injuring another 300. A year later, in 2014, Lalisa decided to return his gold medal to the city. He had also privately given his racing bib to a woman who had lost her lower leg and her husband, who had also sustained serious injuries from the incident. The year following the attack, de Sisa returned to compete again in the Boston Marathon, saying that sports hold the power to unify and connect people all over the world, and that they should never be used as a battleground. He also wanted to show that he was not scared, and he did just that, as in his 2015 do-over, he won for a second time, finishing even faster than he did the previous year. Next up, we have an aerial view shot looking down on Hiroshima and its people just moments before the 5-ton nuclear weapon, nicknamed Little Boy, dropped from the Enola Gray airliner onto the town and its civilians, releasing an explosive force equal to 20,000 tons of TNT, causing mass catastrophic destruction and the instant deaths of an estimated 80,000 people, and the prolonged deaths of thousands more due to radiation poisoning. It has also been estimated that 90% of the city was wiped out that day, the 6th of August in 1994. And the attack was followed up just 3 days later when another atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, releasing a similar explosive force, this one being equal to the force of 21,000 tons of TNT. And coming in at number 1, we have a photograph of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sofia Chotek, taken June 28th in 1914 of Sarajevo, Bosnia. Just moments after this photo was taken, the Archduke was assassinated directly in front of his wife by 19-year-old Bosnian Serb nationalist Gavrilo Prinic. Although the Archduke, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was not the most popular royal at the time, what happened following his death was unprecedented global warfare, the war to end all wars, which would later come to be known as World War I. War was officially declared on July 28th of 1914 and lasted for 4 years, coming to an end on November 11th in 1918. But even after the Great War, as it has been referred to, was finished, the repercussions sent shockwaves throughout nations that extended into the second, even more devastating World War II. I'm Hannah Thompson. Thanks so much for watching the video today. We hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Next up, we have images of Winnie the Pooh, which became censored in 2017 in China. While China does have a rich history of censorship, in which the ban of Gmail, Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as Twitter, now X, are included, no one could have predicted the addition of our honey-loving childhood friend to the list. Images of the funny orange bear became censored after a resemblance was noted between the character and the Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping. The government found the comparison to be a disrespectful mockery of their country's leader and consequently ordered all images of Winnie the Pooh to be blocked from all available search engines, limited as they may be. Next up, we have a series of photos taken during the Great Depression that were banned from being publicly released at the time due to the, well, depressing nature of the content. The photographs were taken by Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, and a number of their colleagues in an attempt to showcase resilient faces in contrast to the backgrounds of ruin in the United States during the depths of the Great Depression. When the photos were presented to the Farm Security Administration, they were not only rejected, but in an attempt to keep them from being published, were hole punched generally directly through the focal point of the image in the hopes of making them unprintable. Ironically, all this did was garner the images that much more fame and recognition, as when they were eventually released, they not only stood for the people's resilience against the economic collapse, but also freedom of the press. Next up, we have America's hidden bunker, Mount Pony. The 400-foot-long, 140,000 square foot bunker made with 1 foot thick steel reinforced concrete was built in 1969 and was a self-sustaining, fully equipped, radiation-hardened facility designed originally as a safe haven to house up to 540 people for up to 30 days in the case of a nuclear attack. However, in 1988, the bunker became much more, as it was used to store several $billion of federal funds that would be used to replenish US currency and restart the economy in an event of a nuclear attack. The money was stored in the bunker for just shy of 10 years until it was relocated in 1997. Understandably, it was incredibly important at the time that any imagery of the bunker's location, layout, and security functions not be released to the public, as it would diminish the secure nature of the underground safe house and holding facility. At our halfway point, we have a series of photographs taken at a United States nuclear power plant depicting the dangerous conditions in which the country stores its nuclear energy, as well as what the plant workers have to endure. A report released by CNN in 2016 showcases the facility in its decrepit state. After the photographs surfaced, nuclear officials used them as an opportunity to request Congress back the administration's push to modernize the facility. Officials also argued that the state of the facility was actually a threat to United States national security goals and said that many critical utility, safety, and support systems had been failing at a dangerous rate, due largely to the fact that the majority of key nuclear facilities in the US were built during World War II with the intention of operating for just 10 to 15 years and have therefore outlived their safe operational lifespan. It seems as though the warnings and pleadings of the nuclear officials have gone unheeded and unheard, as the plants depicted in the photographs appear to have undergone no repairs and presumably just continue to deteriorate. No wonder the government didn't want anyone seeing those photos. It's terrifying, and they're not doing anything about it. Alright, next up we have a photograph of leaked Mexican asylum plans delivered to us by none other than the former United States President Donald Trump. Amidst negotiations with Mexico, Trump called a conference to reveal that he had a secret deal, that is. In the interview, when asked if Trump had made an agreement with Mexico to become a safe third country for asylum seekers, he refused to comment on his discussions with the Mexican president, but instead pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat's breast pocket and said, "That's the agreement that everybody says I don't have." And if you're like most people, you might have assumed that what Trump presented to the reporters was nothing more than a blank sheet of folded paper. Well, you would have assumed wrong, as not only was Trump holding a legitimate government document, but it was legitimately legible, as the sun hit the back of the agreement, illuminating the words printed on the page, which were swiftly captured in a photograph that was enhanced to reveal, long story short, that Mexico was to be considered a safe third country, meaning asylum applicants would be processed in Mexico instead of the United States, and that in order for this to happen, Mexico would have 45 days to reduce migration to the United States. Next, we have another case of Chinese government censorship, but unfortunately, unlike the last one, which was actually pretty funny, this one really isn't, as it involves the deaths of many Chinese civilians during a student-led protest in 1989. 35 years ago, across China, many civilians joined together to call for a political reform within the Chinese government that would give more freedoms to the citizens of the country, lower inflation, and overall provide a higher quality of life. While the official number is highly debated, it is estimated that several hundred to several thousand people died in the square on June 4th of 1989 when the government flooded the streets with soldiers and tanks in an attempt to silence protesters. During this sad scene, one man really stood out, known only as Tank Man. He stood in front of a line of tanks blocking their way down the Chang'an Avenue in Beijing. The capture of this image later became a symbol of endurance for the Chinese people. Of course, the event was not a proud moment in Chinese history for either the citizens, filled with hope and passion and met with loss and destruction, or the government, who in their vanity ended countless lives and created animosity amongst its people. Every year on the anniversary, the Chinese government does its best to suppress the image in an attempt to keep the Chinese people from reflecting too hard on the dark day in history. Starting off our top three, we have Putin in drag. That's right, a circulating image of Putin edited to look as though he is wearing drag makeup, as well as any others that might pop up, have been banned by the Russian government. The image that started it all, which really reminds me of like an Andy Warhol pop art kind of thing, was created by an unknown artist in protest after the anti-gay propaganda law was enacted in Russia, which forbid homosexual acts or discussion in any place where children were present. While the image is, of course, easily available to those of you watching this video, it can still be found in Russia as well, just with a little bit of digging. If you are caught with the image, however, you could receive up to 15 days in a Russian prison or a fine of 3,000 rubles, which at the time the law was put into place was equal to around $53 US. Okay, I am thinking this next one trumps the rest. Well, no, actually, I mean Trump should take a rest from spilling government secrets. I don't know why, but this one actually made me laugh because just reading the headline made me feel like I was being punked. Trump tweets sensitive surveillance images of Iran obtained from a spy satellite. What is going on in the House of Commons? I know that's a Canadian thing, but really. So the image Trump tweeted was of the fallout from a failed Iranian missile launch, and it was taken from a secret spy satellite that no one except officials with incredibly high clearance is supposed to even know about. At first, people wondered if the image had been taken by a drone, since it was so incredibly clear with lots of discernible detail, but aerospace experts quickly determined that it was in fact taken by a satellite. Not only that, but based on the image alone, experts were also able to trace exactly which satellite the image came from. I don't know. It's too much for me. Alright, and to finish us off today, we have another good laugh, as the Thai king, whose name I am scared to even attempt to pronounce, but I will place it somewhere here, has banned all unflattering photos of himself. Now you might think that means that if a person were to capture him mid-yawn or sneeze, they would have to delete the image, in which the king looks a little bit silly and perhaps slightly less than regal. Well, you'd be wrong again, my friends, because this king likes to party. Not only that, but he likes to cover himself in temporary tattoos and party all night long, which usually ends ends up in the disheveled king dressed in nothing but jeans and a very small crop top or sports bra, heading home in his town car the morning after. Now for the people of Germany, which is where the Thai king spends most of his time, this is not an uncommon thing to see. But for the people of Thailand, any photos of the king's escapades are censored and banned from being shared with any members of the public. Okay, I bet you didn't know that another major hotbed for extraterrestrial, UFO, and unidentified aerial phenomenon activity was Brazil. I mean, I did, but maybe you didn't. In fact, this kind of thing is so popular in Brazil that they have an annual day of recognition for these sightings known as the Night of the UFO, which came to be after a major event took place in 1986. On the night of May 19th, a series of unidentified flying objects were seen in the skies of Brazil, and even more non-visual objects were detected via radar across the skies of 4 Brazilian states. Of course, at this time, any and all knowledge the government had on the event was extremely classified. In May of 2012, however, Brazil's Freedom of Information Act went into place, after which the public demanded the release of all the documents relating to the incident. The government complied, and not only released written documents of the events, but also a series of photographs depicting strange activity within the skies above Brazil. Although the images of what appeared to be nothing more than squiggles and clouds of smoke didn't provide much clarity, a statement made by the Minister of Aeronautics did. He said, "This command is of the opinion that the phenomena are solid and reflect, in a certain way, intelligence, due to the ability to follow and maintain a distance from observers, as well as to fly information." After this statement was made, the Brazilian government has still not been able to confirm exactly what took place the day the Night of the UFOs was born. Next, we have a photo taken in 1990 by 2 Scottish chefs who were working in a hotel near the area in which the photograph was taken. After a long day of work, it appears the 2 men had decided to take a hike in an attempt to blow off some steam. While this walk wouldn't end up being incredibly relaxing, it would be wildly exciting, as not long after the 2 men had set off on their journey along the Calvine Scottish countryside, they noticed something hovering above them in the sky. The object was not one that either of the men could identify, and so they pulled out their cameras in an attempt to document the 100-foot flying aircraft instead. The photos, which have been analyzed and show no signs of manipulation, capture the object being circled by a jet plane. They thought the incident was incredibly strange and even newsworthy, so the 2 turned the footage over to the local newspaper for publication, but the images were seized by the British Ministry of Defence and were never released. Until 32 years later, that is, by David Clark, who, unbeknownst to the ministry, had kept a photocopy of one of the original images. The identity of the 2 men was never revealed, nor did they ever come forward to share their story after the images had been seized by the ministry, begging the question of what exactly they saw and what exactly the government was trying to cover up. A photograph taken of an unidentified aircraft lit up by military spotlights in Los Angeles, California, is next on the list. The photograph, which documents an event so big it later became referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles, or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, was taken on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the night the photo was taken, all of Los Angeles was under blackout, as directed by the US military. While the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above had been lit up by a myriad of strange objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers stood absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition appeared to have no effect on the unidentified flying object. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. Furthermore, 3 were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. And finally, we have a handful of screen grabs from a video taken by Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich whilst flying an 18F Super Hornet fighter jet over the Pacific Ocean near San Diego during a training mission for the United States Navy. The footage, taken in November of 2004, was captured after Dietrich was asked to investigate a suspicious object that had been seen dropping from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean and then vanishing. When Alex and their colleague arrived on the scene, the ocean's surface, where the object had been reported, appeared as though it was boiling. Moments after arriving to investigate, a strange, elongated white object came into view Pooh and was captured on video hovering above the water before it disappeared into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving no wake in the oceans below. While the footage has been confirmed to be authentic by the United States Department of Defense, the object itself, along with its origins, remains a mystery.
Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. Human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now, this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now, after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now, believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now, back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. apparitions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now, besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now, the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress.
You're probably thinking this is an AI generated image, but this is actually a genuine photograph. The photo was captured in 1903. Standing in the middle is a photographer named James Rickleton. On either side of him are the Kashmir Giants. Can't miss them. James Rickleton was a photographer and world traveler in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He set out to explore different cultures and capture their lives through his camera. One of his most fascinating adventures took him to Kashmir, a region in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. There he met these two men, dubbed the Kashmir Giants. The guy on the left stood at 7'9", the one on the right 7'4". Kinda crazy that a 7'4" guy is being dwarfed by an even larger man. That's just nuts.
Here's a photo of a man with a firm grasp on the importance of space travel, watching the 1968 Apollo 8 space launch with his wife. That rocket's going up. The Apollo rocket, that is. The first ever spacecraft to leave Earth's gravitational sphere, and the first manned mission to reach the moon. Although the crew, made up of 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, didn't actually step foot on the moon, their spacecraft orbited the lunar body 10 times before returning safely back to Earth. The astronauts aboard Apollo 8 were the first to photograph the far side of the moon, pictured here, and the first to witness an Earthrise, which is like a sunrise but with the Earth.
What an apocalyptic image this is. It looks like a dystopian painting, but it isn't. It's a colorized photograph of the ruins of Stalingrad, one of the biggest, most brutal battles in all of World War II. It took place between August of 1942 and February of 1943. The Germans wanted to capture Stalingrad. It was a key industrial city and would give them control over the Volga River. But the Soviets were determined to defend the city at all costs. And defend it they did. The battle raged for months, with both sides suffering huge losses. Soldiers fought in the streets, buildings, factories. Some of the most intense combat happened house to house. The turning point came in November of 1942, when the Soviets launched a massive counterattack encircling the German forces. This operation, called Operation Uranus, trapped the Germans inside the city with no way to escape. The German troops eventually couldn't hold out, and in February of 1943, they surrendered.
I'm pretty positive every one of you watching this video has heard of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sank just 4 days after its maiden voyage began, but I bet you haven't seen this photograph. For context, approximately 1,500 people died on April 14th of 1912 after the Titanic struck an iceberg around 2 a.m. and became completely submerged underwater in less than 3 hours. While not a guarantee, those who made it onto the ship's lifeboats did have a higher chance at survival. This photograph shows the Titanic's collapsible lifeboat D, which had been lowered from the port side of the large vessel as it went down. The lifeboat was rescued by the RMS Carpathia, another transatlantic ship, around 7:15 a.m. Ironically, 6 years after rescuing the Titanic survivors after their escape from a sinking ship, the RMS Carpathia would also sink after being struck by a German U-boat.
Oh, mirror selfies, so rarely do they work. This is one of those rare cases. Did people take mirror selfies in the 1920s? Well, this Japanese couple did. This photographer snapped a picture of him and his wife sometime in the 1920s. We don't know the names of these people or the exact date the photo was taken. The only info I could find was that a photographer named Hamish Campbell, who'd been based in Tokyo, came across the photo in 2014 while searching through an abandoned home. On the second floor of the home, Campbell had come across a closet that had once been used as a darkroom. There he found hundreds of negatives, including the image you see here. They were all taken by the man in the picture. Other photographs included his wedding, the day-to-day lives of the family, hangouts with neighbors, and pictures like this here of his pet monkey. Yeah, I think this is just a cute one. Good way to end things off. Does this look like a place you'd want to spend the night in? Probably not. It's run down, clearly abandoned. It'd probably be squatters, and there's no furniture. But even worse than all of that, this is said to be one of the most haunted places in Italy. In the quiet village of Cona stands an abandoned house known as Villa Magnoni, left vacant and untouched now for many years. Its windows, aside from one, are completely sealed up. Back in the late 80s, a group of curious young men decided to venture into this abandoned mansion. They actually managed to break in, but once inside, they heard something. It was the distant sound of children singing, at least that's what it sounded like, and it was seemingly coming from the garden. They went outside to investigate, but when they got there, it was completely empty. As they were looking around, an old woman suddenly appeared in the window above them in the house. She scolded and insulted them, demanding they leave the premises immediately. The teenagers did the smart thing and hastily booked it out of there, but just after they'd hopped into their car and began peeling off, they got into an accident. 3 of them ended up losing their lives in the crash, leaving only one survivor. In the aftermath, the villagers took the precautions and sealed off all the windows of Villa Magnoni, believing someone or something dark was lingering inside the property. Weeks later, they discovered that the covering on one specific window, the very one where the old woman had appeared to scold and curse the boys, was mysteriously uncovered. This is one of the last photos taken of the Apollo 1 crew on the day a deadly fire erupted during a pre-launch test. All 3 astronauts lost their lives. On January 27th of 1967, during a pre-launch test for the Apollo program, the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, were conducting a test at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft was mounted on its launch vehicle. The purpose of the test was to check the spacecraft's systems and conditions, simulating a launch with external power sources disconnected. During the test, though, the crew encountered an issue. A fire broke out in the pure oxygen environment of the command module's cabin. The fire spread incredibly fast because of the highly flammable materials that were used at the time to construct the spacecraft. This is one of the last known photographs taken of a man named Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who never returned home from an expedition to Dutch New Guinea, now part of Indonesia, in 1961. Michael was on a mission to study the Asmat people, an indigenous tribe known for their unique art and customs, and while on an art collecting expedition along the coast, Michael's boat capsized. He and a fellow explorer, Rene Wassing, tried to swim to the shore, which was about 12 miles away, but Wassing eventually became too exhausted, and Michael decided he was going to continue swimming alone, hoping to reach help. But Michael would never be seen again. Now, the famous theory is that the very tribe seen with him in this photograph ate him. Now, although cannibalism was still a bit of a thing in some areas of Asmat at the time, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. It just makes for a sensational kind of story. There's another possibility that he was attacked by sharks or just succumbed to exhaustion. This is a photograph taken inside Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky, a hospital that became famous for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. So yeah, a lot of people died there. It opened in 1910 to treat people with the deadly lung disease. Back then, there wasn't a cure for tuberculosis, so the sanitarium focused on providing fresh air and sunlight, thinking it might help patients get better. As the years went by, better treatments for tuberculosis came along, and the need for places like Waverly Hills decreased. The sanitarium eventually closed in 1961. After that, it went through various uses. It was an old folks' home for a short time. Nothing really stuck, though. Now, what makes Waverly Hills famous, or maybe infamous, is its reputation for being very haunted. Over the years, people started to tell stories about strange things happening there. Glowing orbs, the sounds of disembodied coughs, footsteps making their way down the empty halls. One of the most famous stories is about a ghostly figure named Timmy. According to the tale, Timmy was a little boy who stayed at Waverly Hills and died there. People claim to have heard a child's laughter and seen a shadowy figure resembling a young boy. Because of all these stories, Waverly Hills has become pretty popular for ghost hunters. There have even been TV shows and documentaries filmed there. And finally, we have Mayenga Nasaka. Mayenga Nasaka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during a scary time in 1976, the Ebola outbreak. This photo captures one of the last moments of her life. Mayenga got infected with the Ebola virus while she was working at Mambalat Hospital in Kinshasa. She was caring for a nun who'd been brought in from Yambuku Mission Hospital where the outbreak started. The thing is, Mayenga's case became kind of famous because she was one of the first healthcare workers to get sick during the outbreak. In the picture, you can see her standing next to another nurse taking care of a patient, but here's the heartbreaking part. Just a few days after this photo was taken, Mayenga passed away. Hospital staff didn't have the right gear to protect themselves, and there weren't enough precautions to stop them from coming into contact with patients' blood or fluids. This was the very early stages of the outbreak, and people didn't know how dangerous the virus really was at the time. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. This video is about scary moments in history that they don't teach in school. Yep, we found all the best facts from history that they can't teach you about in school for obvious reasons. So you can learn them from us instead. Click the video now to find out more.